Welcome to Sweet Speak. I'm your host, JD Miller, and we have a fantastic show for you here today. And KK is with us. KK is with Data Hat AI, and the mission is to democratize AI. It's guiding the beacon they're working with C-suite across the board, providing leadership in the Gen AI adoption, governance space, and ensuring ethical AI practices. He had a tenure at Haleon, OneFootball, Farfetch, Datadon, and more. He's got a career that's been focused on innovation in leveraging data, AI, and machine learning in CPG, online retail, fashion, luxury, sports, media, telecommunications, and more. He's got awards too, people. He's been recognized as a World Top 100 Chief Data Officer in 23 and 24, and Top 100 Data Influencer in 24, and with leadership recognized in the Gartner Data and AI Board World Top 40 Chief AI and Analytics. Welcome to the show, KK.
Thank you for having me, JD. You're making me feel really important right now with all those awards that you talked about. Thank you, though. Good to be here.
We've got a lot we're going to talk about. And I had you at a dinner, or online discussion rather, that I had not long ago, and where you envision AI going and is really fascinating to me. So I want to start and talk about the strategic priorities when it comes to this next year and beyond when we're talking about AI. And as it continues to evolve, what do you believe is the most critical areas of focus for data leaders in 2025? And how should they balance AI innovation with governance and ethical considerations?
I think that's a great starting question, JD. The answer, I believe, is in the question itself. So when you say strategic priorities for 2025, I think the strategy for AI and data for a lot of companies hasn't been well laid out. Unless you're a really strong high-tech player, a lot of the companies that use technology, that use data and AI, don't really have a very strong strategy for them. That strategy should include both the impact and the responsibility, the security ethics, things that you covered. But I think really, if you step back for a second, let's think about 2022. When ChatGPT was launched, excuse me, it's very early in the morning here in Silicon Valley, so I have a little bit of a sore throat. I'm going to take some coffee.
No worries.
If you think about 2022, when ChatGPT was launched, the acceleration that brought by allowing AI to be accessed by everybody is what actually created this inflection point. And so since then, the acceleration in AI, in the uses of AI, the conversation about AI has been there. My concern is I feel like we are almost in the trough right now of disillusionment that the hype cycle talks about. And we are beginning to be at that point where people said, oh, this was really exciting. Yes, I can do a whole bunch of really interesting things with it. But am I going to get benefit for my business from this? Am I going to be able to productize this? Am I going to be able to monetize this? So I suspect for 2025, it's time for a lot of the leaders in these companies to step back for a second and say, what is our strategy for AI and data? And how are we going to actually go about doing it? Where are the investments going to be? Is Gen AI going to be part of it? I suspect the answer is yes for most cases. But how is Gen AI going to be part of it? Who is going to lead this? What are our data sources? So really strategize the data and AI part, and then start executing in order to get that monetization, etc. I suspect 2025 is going to be really that slow and steady climb into actually beginning to execute on AI and ML.
So you bring up a great point about leaders needing to step back. So how do you see the role of AI evolving in augmenting executive decision making, and what are those risks, rewards for relying heavily on AI for high stakes business decisions?
Yep. And I think you hit upon a really good point as well, which is it's actually not just AI. It's the AI and the data behind the AI. Executives today have access to some insights. They have access to some dashboards that tell you how the business is actually doing. What they don't really have is they don't have the artificial intelligence or machine learning. For the most part, some companies do, but for the most part, a lot of companies don't actually use AI and ML on their own data and combine it with disparate sources of data outside of the data that they have themselves. And they are missing out because what that data can tell them, along with the machine learning models that are running on top of it, is not just how the business is performing, which is the backward looking dashboards that we see, not just some predictions on where things will go, but very sophisticated, actionable insights. What should we be doing if we want to go in a certain direction? Being able to combine our own data, making it high quality, making it trustable, making it something that we can actually use, and then using it to get predictions on where we believe things are going to go, gives those executives the understanding, the knowledge, the power to start taking some of those decisions. I am not saying that the AI should be allowed to take those decisions. I think the human should be the one, the executive themselves should be the one taking those decisions. However, the data and the machine learning models, the AI, the Gen AI, is able to inform that executive. I'll give you an example. There's an interesting project I'm working on where we're taking unstructured data from around the internet to be able to understand how a certain company is performing. And then we are able to give that information to some of their competitors, as an example. And these executives at the competitor companies now have a picture about about the performance of some of these companies that they're keeping an eye on. Rather than humans having to scour the web and understand what's going on, if you use the power of AI and machine learning, you can understand all of these things faster, better, and then let the human actually take the decision. And this is just external data. Think about when you get into the first party data, an understanding of really how our own customers, our own partners, even our own employees are working, are using technology, are performing. That just completely changes the game. So I think execs will learn to use AI and machine learning on data, both internal and external, to inform their decisions.
I guess that brings us to AI governance and regulation. So, with it becoming more increasingly integrated into business operations, what challenges do you foresee in complying with new regulations around AI, data privacy, and ethics? And how can leaders prepare for these changes?
I think there are two sides to that question, JD. One is the compliance part, and the other is the ethics part. The compliance part, if you have a company that is localized to a certain jurisdiction, to a certain country or a continent, then you're focused on the compliance based on that area. But if you're a global company, as an example, a lot of the companies I've worked with are global companies, and I've been a chief data officer for them. The compliance becomes really sophisticated, really complex. And the reason for that is, I'll just give you one example. Let's say you have a a resume scanning service from based in Europe. Well, the rules that that resume scanning service will have to follow will be based on the EU AI Act. And the EU AI Act comes into effect next year in August. So if you're building something today, deploying it today, beginning to use it today, you have to comply to the EU AI Act. However, the US is often a huge market for a lot of companies like that. Suppose that companies selling into the US, the laws and the regulations here are fairly different. The spirit of those laws and regulations are actually very similar, but the actual things that the company must do are different. So now that company, which was based in Europe and was complying with EU AI Acts, needs to now think about what they need to do in the US. And imagine if this company goes into Asia, going into China and India and places like that, there's a whole different set of rules and compliance that must happen for these companies there. They may not even be able to use their cloud provider. Certain cloud providers can't even function in certain countries. And so what that means is, coming back to what we said earlier, the executives need to step back for a second and really understand, where are we going to go? What are the rules, the laws, the compliance that we must actually execute on? And then they must create a framework. I call this a responsible AI framework. The responsible AI framework has both of those sides we were mentioning earlier. One is the actual compliance for where you're going to be deploying, and the other is the ethics part of it. And talking about the ethics part of it, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see there was a post I had put up where I was planting a tree in Hyderabad in India, wearing this hat, wearing this same jacket, and I uploaded that picture to DALI, and I asked DALI to create a caricature of myself. Well, what DALI came back with was a much younger version of me. Thank you, DALI. But and I had lost some weight too. But it messed up my hat. It messed up my eyes. I had blue eyes. Actually, I had one green and one blue eye. But these are things that we can all see. The one thing that most people didn't see, and the picture is on my LinkedIn profile, so go ahead and take a look at it when you want, was it changed my race. So I'm of Indian descent. And what it did is it created a brown person who was very European, definitely not, Indian, Asian in race. And the thing is, this is the kind of thing that AI struggles with today, because it may not actually recognize race as an example. Now, the question on the ethical side is, if you use DALI or if you use another similar program to create content, and it misses somebody's race and changes the race to be something else, is that an issue? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But it's a human who must understand that, a human who must take that decision. And so creating a human in the loop as part of the responsible AI framework, really, really critical. So I think that's why compliance is one side, ethics is the other side. Having a framework in order to address both of those is critical for the executives to build.
Let's dive deeper into that. When we're talking about ethical AI in the competitive landscape, talk to me more about frameworks and best practices data leaders should adopt. Because we also need to tackle transparency, fairness, accountability. Talk to me more about that.
Absolutely, and you missed explainability. A lot of these models, the AI models that are being created, you can't actually explain why it took a certain decision that it took. If you think about the resume scanning service that I was talking about as a hypothetical example earlier, in the EU AI Act, it says very specifically that you must not um, reject candidates based on just an AI recommendation. Now, that has very deep implications. But I would say that's compliance. Ethically as well, you need to really understand why a certain candidate might get rejected by an AI. And then you have to be comfortable with how that decision was taken as a company, not just as a compliance reason, but as a company, we need to know why it's doing that. If you remember, there was a case that Amazon actually was very forthright in talking about this publicly, and you can do a Google search about it. But when Amazon built a resume scanning service, etc., it trained it on their own internal resume database and profiles on their own employees. Well, the net result of it very quickly was that the resume scanning service started only recommending white males for the most part into Amazon for interviews. And more power to them. Companies have to do more of this kind of facing up to themselves. What Amazon did is they said, why is this happening? And they dug deeper into it, and they realized that because it was trained on internal data, it just so happened that Amazon had a lot of single white males in their company. And so What you train the machine learning models on determines how they perform. So if you remember earlier, it used to be about lineage in the data. Where did we get a certain piece of data from? What was the source? How did it get to this point? Now you need lineage in AI decisioning. And these are sophisticated, difficult questions that we need to dive deeper into in order to understand how we're going to use this AI, which is why the framework that we were talking about, really important. You have to have some people from the data governance team so that they understand the lineage, etc. You have to have some people from the AI team so that they understand how these decisions were actually taken, not just the explainability, but the fairness that you mentioned, and so many other important things. You also need somebody from legal and compliance who can actually understand what the legalities are. If we are going into the US versus going into Canada, what is the difference in compliance that I must take care of? And I found there are also people across the company who might have better information about these use cases. The stakeholders themselves need to be part of that decisioning process so that they can look into these questions. The HR person, as an example, for a resume scanning service, would really already have some of these things that we do as humans. How can you then make sure that when we deploy AI, we are still staying ethical, fair, and using those same best practices? The question comes up, should AI be held to the same standards as humans are? And I think we actually need to hold AI to much stronger standards than humans are. If you have an autonomous driving vehicle and that autonomous driving vehicle even touches somebody, can you imagine the amount of outcry we would have? Versus humans, we as humans have accidents every day. People do get hurt every day around the world, in every city of the world. But with an AI, we have an opportunity to improve ourselves. If an autonomous vehicle can avoid 100% of accidents, then that's what we should strive for.
I had a great conversation with John Thompson of the global head of AI for Ernst & Young, and he talked about scaling in his organization to 270 some thousand people using AI. Talk to me about operationally, easy for me to say, at scale. What are the key barriers to scaling AI across an organization? How can data leaders overcome this, and common pitfalls when moving from pilot AI projects to enterprise-wide adoption?
It's a fascinating problem, and it's a problem that every data and AI leader is struggling with today. There are multiple facets to it. One is an educational one. A lot of people actually don't understand what AI is versus what data is. And JD, you'll hear technologists talking about data and AI separately, as an example. I feel like data and AI are actually two sides of the same coin. You can't address one without addressing the other. Whether you're addressing data, you have to look at AI. If you're addressing AI, you have to look at the data. That's where the AI starts from. But even some very senior leaders across a lot of these companies, even technologists, don't often understand that that is the situation. So why is that? It's that way because data and AI really are a cultural and people problem. The technology part of it, we can sort out. But the people part, the cultural part, that's where the real issue starts happening. It's not that people don't want to adopt AI and data. It's that there are differences in how they understand, how much do they understand about data and AI. So the first real thing is educational. It's not just data literacy, it's about letting people understand what that data and AI can do for them and how can they make impact on their day-to-day lives with it. It's all about monetization, it's all about improvement, automation, etc., etc. And so the first thing that people have to understand is, how can I use this data and AI? The second thing that has to happen is, once people are beginning to understand these things, they have to start figuring out what those sources of data are. Can I trust that data itself? Where is the data coming from? Do I have complete data or not? One of the little projects I'm working on is on an unstructured data to structured data uh, problem solving, and it's a really fascinating problem, because what happens is almost 75 to 80% of the data in a company is actually not in a structured form. It's customer reviews, it's customer comments, somebody called your helpline and left a message, somebody talked to a chatbot, somebody talked to a human and asked questions and said certain things. A lot of the data is being collected. Some companies are sophisticated and will translate that data into, they'll vectorize it, they'll create key value pairs, they will take information out of that conversation and understand what the conversation was about and use it to learn what needs to be done next. But most companies don't. And this 75-80% of that data is actually where a lot of the golden nuggets are sitting. So how do you even start extracting that information and start using it for the benefit of the company? It starts with finding the right tools, putting those right tools together. But you can't do those things until you have people who actually understand what those tools are, understand what that data is. And you need two kinds of people. So you need, on one side, you need somebody like me who understands where the technology landscape is and where the data and AI are going. On the other hand, you need somebody who's a domain expert. So when we talked about customer reviews as an example, maybe it's a customer service domain leader who understands what these people are talking about, what is important, what's not, etc. Which is why, again, I come back to the point, data and AI are a people problem and a culture problem. You have to educate those people, and then those people have to help them figure out the data sources, the tools, the infrastructure that must be there. A lot of the vendors out there, a lot of the cloud providers, the hyperscalers, they have a lot of sources of information. There are other people, people like yourselves, JD, who bring others together, and we have these conversations where you can learn from other people. Like somebody said, if we have seen far, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants. That's, I've added the we instead of the I here, because I think we as a community are seeing farther because we are sharing a lot of these information and best practices so others can learn. So you scale by looking at each one of these things, which is why that strategy becomes important again, that we started the conversation with. If you don't have a strategy, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there.
You talk about data, and obviously data, AI are intertwined for obvious reasons, but many AI initiatives fail due to poor data quality. And that's one thing a lot of organizations struggle with. So how can data leaders better manage their data infrastructure to ensure AI models deliver the accurate and actionable insights?
What you focus on is what you make happen, is my belief. So data quality is absolutely, I think, priority one. I would say priority zero is compliance. Priority one is data quality. And why do I say data quality? It's because if you have the wrong kind of data, if the data is not trustable, then the insights that you will create, the artificial intelligence and the machine learning you will do, will create bad insights, bad AI. Bad data leads to bad AI, which means you must first start with creating better data. What I have found works well is you can't wait to build it and then they will come. So what you have to do instead is you have to do both at the same time. So it creates a challenge for data leaders. What works for me is I have always created a data governance organization, which has data quality as one of their top priorities. What I've also found is there are a lot of tools. There are some open source tools. There are some vendors who are doing a lot of this work. And just talking to a lot of these vendors and looking at those open source tools gives us the ability to start understanding what we should start with. Where do we start? What are others seeing? And then finding a use case which actually needs high quality data. Finding a use case, getting the funding for that use case, putting people around that use case, and then actually executing on it. Because once you start putting that data into these tools and solving a real problem for a certain domain, you learn so much. But then you also win, because the domain experts and the stakeholders, when they start winning, this is something that people see all around us. Remember how I was saying data is a culture problem and a people problem? One way that I've found of making it happen is to make heroes and heroines out of these data people. So that data governance, that data quality expert who's leading that effort, together with the domain expert who is leading the actual use case. When they succeed, and we help make them succeed by putting the right resources, the right money, the right creating, providing the air cover. A CDO provides air cover, basically. How do you make their path easier? When they become successful, we do a lot of internal marketing. We talk about it. We do town halls. We share it internally. And when others see that this is actually doable, that it's possible, and they learn from how we're doing it internally, it changes the whole way that the whole company is thinking. So get the data quality, make heroes, do some internal marketing.
Let's look ahead next year and beyond. What emerging AI technologies or trends do you believe will have the most transformative impact on businesses?
I think there are some areas that we are not looking at right now, which I suspect will need to be looked at. Of course, agentic AI, everybody is talking about agents being able to connect multiple steps together and have an agent which is almost a digital twin of a human. The way that humans perform a certain task, agents will perform some of those tasks as well, with some intelligence and using a lot of the data. I think one of the parts that I am noticing as we deploy AI is that humans have a bias too. We don't talk enough about the bias that humans have. And what ends up happening is I'm a data guy. So when I look at, even when I was on the board of Farfetch as an example, a public company on the New York Stock Exchange, when I was in these board meetings, I was thinking and looking at these things almost as a data person. I had that bias, that inherent bias. And I had to take a step back and force myself to think not just as a data and AI person, and not even just as a technologist, but as a senior executive, and think about the things outside of what I'm looking at right now. So the human bias part, not a lot of people are addressing that. What happens is these machine learning tools are learning not just from the humans, they're learning from the data. So they are able to see things that we don't see as humans. And we haven't got to that point yet. We're just still scratching the surface with what AI can do. So I think agentic AI, beginning to see much more than we as humans can do it. And then I'll give you two more very quick pointers. One is on the sustainability side. We haven't really started looking at sustainability. And in the US here, we don't have sustainability or ESG overall is mostly voluntary. There are some things that we must do, but a lot of things that the companies do is voluntary. But if you're selling into Europe, for instance, or other parts of the world, there are real specific things that you must comply to over a period of time. And I think we all will leave a worse planet for our kids and our grandkids if we don't look at the amount of power that AI is using. We used to think that mining for Bitcoin and stuff was bad. Well, AI is much, much worse. So one of the big things that I think we as data leaders must do, and vendors and users both included, is how do we reduce the amount of power consumption? How do we actually create much more sustainable practices, not just because the compliance is forced on us in Europe and not forced in the US. And by the way, the SEC created a working group, a task force, I think, on ESG, which typically is a sign that there is compliance coming in the US, which means we will have to start preparing for those. So I think these are some of the ones that we're not looking at right now, which are probably going to happen. The future is bright in my mind. This is only going to grow. And I'm excited to be part of this.
In our last 30 seconds we have here in KK, this has been fantastic. Talk to me. What do you have going on right now?
I'm doing a lot of work with senior leaders across industries where people don't actually have a lot of this background. And I find, having been a CDO 3-4 times and having seen this in many different industries, CPG, sports, fashion, fast fashion, I'm able to bring a lot to the table for them. So I'm helping CIOs, CEOs figure out their data strategy.
Wonderful. KK, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thanks for jumping on and being part of the show. For those of you who may have joined late, the recording will be on LinkedIn Live. We'll also have a podcast out tomorrow. So KK, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, JD. It's been a pleasure.